Hello, I'm Somi Arian. I'm a tech philosopher, author, filmmaker, and the founder of InPeak, a platform where entrepreneurs and business professionals come to network, learn together, and stay ahead of the curve in the fast paced world of emerging technologies like blockchain, Web3, NFTs, AI, automation, and so much more. My guest on today's podcast is Evin McMullen, the co founder of Disco.xyz, which is working on decentralized identity in the metaverse and ensuring that we maintain control of our own data. This was a super interesting and insightful conversation that I'm sure you will really enjoy, as it answers many of the questions that a lot of us have about living and working in the metaverse. So let's dive right in. So do you want to start by kind of giving people a little bit of an idea of what you're doing, and then that will spark a lot of questions, and I will go from there.
Fantastic, Somi. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. Really excited to be able to share more of our work and our vision with your community. So I'm Evin, and I'm based here in Brooklyn, New York. And at Disco, we think a lot about what it means to be yourself in the metaverse. So at Disco, we're building your identity for the metaverse, meaning that we are making it as simple and easy for you to own and control the data that makes you, you, in the same way that you own and control your tokens. We are building your data backpacks for the metaverse so that when you create awesome data in the apps where you hang out, doing the activities you do every day, you can capture that data and bring it with you and use it later on.
That's amazing. So can you tell me, do you have a technical background? So how did you come up with this idea? Are you an engineer?
So I started off as an engineer and built many, small games, tools, and experiences when I was pretty young, when I was a kid. And actually in school and undergrad over 10 years ago, I started off doing quite a lot of engineering. But it wasn't super satisfying for me in an academic context. And so I fell down the rabbit hole of free and open source software and got very involved in the community thinking about how we can use legal wrappers to make data more free and more accessible. I studied identity in digital spaces and how we show up and decide what parts of ourselves to share in persistent digital environments like World of Warcraft and chat roulette, Facebook, and Twitter. And so my exploration of self-expression in digital space has certainly started in a more technical context, but explored aspects of anthropology and sociology as well. And it was around that time that I learned about censorship resistant networks and Bitcoin, which sort of got me onto the crypto track. In my career, I've worked on a variety of human-centered design practices, spent time working on enterprise identity. But with Disco, I took a step back earlier this year and decided that I really wanted to build something for everyone. I wanted to show the magic of Web3 and make that accessible to all without first requiring them to connect a bank account or pull out a credit card to pay for something.
That's so fascinating. Can you tell me where you are in your journey right now? Like, where is Disco? Is it something that I can use already, or where is in the journey of from ideation to actually being usable?
So Disco is currently in private beta, where we are exploring our earliest use cases with some partners in the DAO ecosystem, as well as internally with our team and our community. We are really excited to be able to offer these capabilities to folks like you and your community and your users and listeners this summer. So in June, you'll be able to visit disco.xyz, connect your wallet with one click as you would normally another Web3 app. And immediately we will create that data backpack for you, and you can start generating your own data to carry with you, receiving it from your friends, and interacting with Web3 apps.
That's so fascinating. I'm really, really looking forward to testing that out. And we have our community is growing as well, and people are really interested in how these new technologies are, being implemented. So, what happens when I connect my wallet? What will I see? What does that data pack mean? Other than because, like right now, let's say my wallet is that I'm assuming that's like my MetaMask wallet, right? And right now I just have some NFTs in there. So I'm trying to kind of get a feel for tangibly what do we mean by those data packs?
So an Ethereum compatible wallet like MetaMask is almost like a set of binoculars. It allows us to see what's happening over there on the chain what kinds of tokens have been mapped to our public address. But it has very little local storage. You can't put a lot inside of your MetaMask that's not a reflection of what's happening on the chain. And so off-chain data, private data that's written about you takes up space. It needs to go somewhere. Those credentials need to go somewhere to sleep at night, as it were. And so with Disco, we make it simple and easy for you to own and control these credentials stored off-chain in decentralized storage encrypted against your keys. But what you see on the screen, although it's very sort of technical and secure on the back end, what you see on the screen should feel a lot like a personal settings page, very similar to your Apple Wallet, where you can see rectangular credentials that feel like those plastic cards in your physical wallet. Things like membership, identity, any kind of statement written about you by someone else.
That's really cool. So when this is ready, will you come and show us and show us how it works, how we can connect our wallets, and will there be a demo?
I would love to come share a demo with you all, and we can do it together. What we're really excited about, actually what could be really fun to create with your community, is issuing credentials that attest to the fact that they've listened to this content, or they've viewed this podcast, that they're regular listeners, contributors, or participants in the community in some way. And being able to capture these proofs of non-financial work can help to demonstrate, the fact that they've participated in these activities if that comes up again. So showing, over time that they're a participant in a community performing work that's not appropriate to capture on chain, but is still valuable and relevant to their experience.
So is that like POAPs basically?
Very similar. We love the POAP team. We absolutely love what they're doing, but verifiable credentials are different than the NFTs that POAP dispenses because they are statements written about you, and so they cannot be transferred. Whereas a POAP can be acquired outside of the context in which it was initially offered, can be resold, gifted, or shared in some way outside of the context. NFTs offer pretty low assurance around their holders, meaning that if you have an NFT, it's hard for me to tell without some additional context if you acquired it via airdrop, if it was gifted to you, if you bought it, if you traded it for something, if someone paid you fiat currency for it, if you stole it. And so without that assurance around how public address came into a relationship with a token, we can't really tell whether someone was actually at the party they have the POAP for, although it does help us to show that they've curated their external presentation to include that particular asset. So in the same way that you are not your t-shirts, you are not the contents of your wallet, those are just reflections of how you curate yourself. Rather, credentials are actually a description of you and a reflection of the activities that you yourself have done because they're specific to your identity alone.
I love this. Do you see this being something that companies can use for their members, for example? Is there a B2B aspect to it as well?
Certainly. The wonderful thing about verifiable credentials is that they are open and composable. And so any party can capture any piece of information in a credential, bestow it upon the individual it's written about, or use it for some other kind of attestation, and then leverage it for access control in both digital and physical spaces.
Fantastic. So, for example, one of the things that we want to do with our members, we want to be able to follow who is attending the sessions live, who is participating, who is asking questions. And then if they watch it back, whether they watch it fully, how much they watch it, how much they're learning. I was initially thinking about adding some quizzes, but I've never liked quizzes myself. I personally, I think if I have watched, let's say, for example, if you have a course on NFTs, if somebody has watched 80% of that or 90% of that, they probably have learned enough to be able to kind of get by, or they may not necessarily be able to say it back to you. I'm looking currently at a solution similar to this. So this may be a possibility that we may be able to use your product in the sense that I want to be able to incorporate that into our platform so that we can keep track of what people are watching. And then if you hold one of our NFTs, and you are watching all of these things, then you have, let's say, for example, the next time there's a NFT drop, you will get priority, on the allow list, right? Or for example, there will be some other NFTs down the line that are going to be really like limited. Let's say, for example, there will be 100 NFTs that will give you access to experiences directly with me. Like we can go to CERN together, like we can go to MIT, or we can go stargazing. I'm building these experiences around science, technology, philosophy. Maybe we go to, like, say, I'm going to go to Prague and I'm going to go to, Kafka's house, and like that, like that's like these are moments that kind of really mean so much to me. And I want to be able to share it with some of the people who own our NFTs, who have been like long-time supporters from early days. And I want to be able to follow their journeys and make sure that like they are, these are people that are really learning stuff with us, and I want to be able to reward them in a very meaningful way for what they're learning. So would the product be called Disco, or because the Disco is the name of the brand, right? What's the product called? The verifiable credential? Is there like a short term for it? And how would we implement that?
So in the same way that we can describe NFTs by their data primitive and by their use case, we have NFTs that are ERC 721s. We have NFTs that are art objects. Similarly, with verifiable credentials, there's the verifiable credential spec, which is the technical definition. And then there are the use cases, membership cards, proofs of participation, proofs of learning, proofs of achievement or completion, tickets, all sorts of different use cases. So what Disco enables is the easy accrual for end users of these credentials and their ability to manage these credentials, what parts of themselves they're associated with, what identifiers they're mapped to, whether they're related to their Twitter handle, their Ethereum address, their Solana address, et cetera, and the ability to issue, request, disclose, and curate those credentials around themselves. Similarly, we make it easy for applications to issue and validate these credentials. So not only can they bestow them upon their community, but they can also read credentials that their community brings to them from other places throughout Web 2 and Web 3. So overall, I think the suggestions you've made are really fantastic ones. And what I would highlight here is that, verifiable credentials can be used nicely in combination with on-chain assets. So as we discussed earlier, NFTs offer a pretty low assurance around the public address to which they're mapped. And they also have an unfettered secondary market. So you cannot control sort of who is accessing a given point if the only element to access that point is an NFT that's transferable. However, in conjunction with verifiable credentials that are non-transferable, these sorts of unique combinations can take into account both on-chain data and off-chain private reputation or proofs of experience, completion, participation, like all those different use cases for the primitive that we might have. So what Disco will make possible is the programmatic or manual issuance of credentials. So let's say someone goes stargazing with you. You can issue a credential to them attesting to the fact that you two have looked upon the universe and discussed what might be out there. And then that individual can take that stargazing credential and show it to some other party who can, without having to call you, trust the fact that you two have done that activity together, whether that's an app or a person in space.
Yeah, fascinating. I love it. So one of the things that I'm trying to do with the platform, and actually we are going to rebrand, because when we first started, it was focused mostly on women. However, we have decided to expand it because there are very, very few women in the Web3 space or interested in it, and as we expand, I really want to work on this concept of male allyship and men supporting women and wanting to, have more women in this space, but also building a space where men and women together can discuss these things and feel learn together, basically. And so we found it very limiting for our members as well to have only women, so it started out that way, and then it became clear that that was not necessarily the right way to go. So we are expanding now, and we are going to be rebranding, and then the FemPeak is going to become a subsection of the bigger brand. So I'm currently working on that. And the idea of this bigger brand is it's all about emerging technologies. It's about teaching people about emerging technologies. Today, that's Web3. 6 months time, it may be some other things. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, or even a year ago, people weren't talking about DAOs as much as they're talking about now. So, right. So same with NFTs, right? So these new things come up and we want to be able to stay on top of it. And also not just about blockchain, but also artificial intelligence. And I'm also already starting to do a lot of research on quantum computing because I know that the next disruption is going to come from that. So we want to build a space where we close the gap between formal education and emerging technologies, because the speed is so fast that it's very hard for a formal education to catch up with it, right? Like, for example, there's no point in going to university anymore to learn about marketing, like marketing strategy. There's just no point in it because marketing has changed so much and it's changing every day. Marketing in Web3, we already know how different it is to marketing in Web2. So these are the kind of things that we are teaching on the platform. And I can see an opportunity for these verifiable credentials to follow people's journey and to give real-time credentials so that you don't have to wait to finish a degree and then, do an exam and like go through certain things. It may well be that for you to find a job in a DAO, all you need is to have done, 30% of this course, right? And that may be enough to show that you can get started. And you can get started and you can continue to learn. So basically, essentially what I'm building is a platform for lifelong learning in emerging technologies. And how do you see your idea of verifiable credentials complementing education? Actually, let me ask you this question. How do you see the future of education as a whole? Do you think we will still have schools and universities as we go into the metaverse?
So at Disco, we think of the metaverse as your ability to show up in any digital or physical environment and receive a personalized experience as a result of the parts of yourself that you choose to share. I think that there will always be a role for formal structures like universities. However, the range of spaces in which we can accrue valuable skills that can contribute to communities will increase drastically. I think, to your point, verifiable credentials as a data form are uniquely well suited to documenting academic achievements that are personal to us, that are contextual to our experiences, and that can have relevance in a variety of different contexts. There are already a wonderful, and diverse range of secondary education institutions that are experimenting with verifiable credentials, from the state of Colorado to the University of Arizona to secondary education institutions all over Europe. I think it's really exciting that there is such focus, especially at the standards level from the World Wide Web Consortium. Their educational verifiable credentials working group is extraordinarily active. They're currently supporting a number of bounties to encourage the open source development of tooling around these capabilities. And so I think that our ready ability to solve the phone home problem with academic achievements, where anyone reading your resume can trust that its contents are validated and can independently do so, rather than having to check manually on someone's credentials and achievements. And I also think that the real-time nature of these capabilities, or the near real-time ability to accrue skills at your own pace that you mentioned, will allow many more self-directed learners to find new roles based on new skill sets in a timeline that works for them, as opposed to an academic calendar season.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned that you can share the things that you choose to share. That, I think that's a key point here, which is a differentiator to the way that things are in Web2, because there's been many times, when I remember I used to be in a death metal band, and when there were many times where, somebody would post something on their website that wasn't very flattering, and and you were asking them, you were like look, maybe take that down, or something like that. Do you see that in Web3 with these verifiable credentials, we may be able to have more control over our identity? I mean, for me personally, I'm like, you go through so many phases throughout your life, like I did modeling, I was in a metal band, I was a filmmaker, I studied political philosophy. So like there are so many of these different things I've done that on the surface, they may not look like they are relevant to each other, but the combination of all of those things, but most of the time we don't have any control over how these things are portrayed, right? And when it comes to Web3, especially this issue of there are a lot of people who are anonymous. Like, for example, think about Azuki, right? What happened right now? If there was a way that he could still be anonymous, but when he started that, initiative, if there was a way for people to be able to verify that he was a trustworthy person, that he didn't have a track record of abandoning projects, things like that. How do you think this will play out in Web3? Because if we have the ability to control the way that we are portrayed, is that possible? And then if it is possible, what could be also maybe the negatives? Because could it be that somebody could then hide certain things? Like they would be like, okay, let me look at selectively, how am I being shown? Are the things that I can, delete, and or like not show, you know what I mean? Like, how do you see this working out? Because in Web 2, as long as you know the person's name, there's quite a lot you can find out about them.
So I think in the future, the absence of positive reputation will be negative reputation. As you know, people don't like to curate negative things about themselves. They don't, lead with the parts of themselves that other people don't care for. And so it can warrant a conversation when an absence of positive reputation is present. Or is when there is an absence of positive reputation.
I love it. This is game changing, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say,
no, please.
This is so important what you just said. Like, I know that, I have ADHD, so I know that as I was explaining this, I could see that I wasn't maybe explaining it very clearly, but you got exactly what I'm trying to say. This is very, very interesting. That if you are unknown and nobody knows anything about you, that's a red flag, essentially, potentially. Especially if you are trying to build a project that's trying to get people to invest thousands or, hundreds of thousands or millions in it, right?
So my dear friend and extraordinarily sharp colleague, Michael Senna, who leads a project called Ceramic and founded 3Box as a co-founder of Uport and of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, he characterizes an aspect of this as the known universe problem. The known universe problem is that an application can only deliver an experience as rich to its user as the known universe of information that the app has about that user. So your experience is defined by the known universe of information about you. The more information about you that is possible, the more feasible interactions can be personalized to you and can interact with your presentation of self. This is true for the richness of our interactions with apps, but also for the richness of our interactions with other parties in Web3. Right now, the known universe of information about any given wallet address is quite small because it is limited only to that data that is public and inherently financial because it's happening on chain. So for all data that doesn't have a double spend problem and that doesn't require global public availability, in Web3, that is not part of our known universe, which means that we cannot base our coordination on any of that kind of data. We are left alone to the data on the chain, which doesn't give us a very rich picture about one another.
Do you see a scenario where the data that there is about us in Web2 could find its way into on-chain?
So the challenge with much data in Web2 and a lot of data in Web3 is that there's not a lot of consent involved in the way that it gets shared about us. So in Web2 right now, when we use applications, we consent to hand over the data we create, the data that describes us while we're inside that app environment. apps are where we go to be surveilled. So the secondary market for the data about us that we generate inside of apps is unfettered, out of our control, beyond our consent. There are data brokers that buy and sell this information and can do with it whatever they choose without consulting us. And that includes putting that data on a blockchain. So for all data moving forward that we might generate or capture for our use and our sovereign ownership, we can decide how we want to share that data, especially if we capture it in the form of data that can be encrypted against our public keys, that can be known to us and owned and controlled by us, and can be verified by others so that others might rely upon it in a trustless way.
Yeah. You know what? This is making me think that we are almost taking a step back to take 2 steps forward, right? Because we were doing, when I say we, I mean, as humans, we were doing a really good job of creating mass data, which is needed to progress in machine learning, right? But then that data was in the hands of the likes of Facebook and now Meta and all the other.
Yes, exactly. We made a Faustian bargain to prioritize the data availability to feed our apps and machine learning algorithms, and prioritized, that data availability over the informed consent of users worldwide.
Yeah. So I always give this whenever I'm talking about data and how our data is being used on social media. Not just social media, Google, etc. Like I suppose that's a form of social media. Is that basically our data? It's a little bit like the fossil fuels that are powering our economy. In a similar way, it's kind of like this fossil fuel needs to be refined to be usable. So then you have refineries, right? And they refine that. So essentially, companies like Meta, they will come and say, hey, you've got this oil in your backyard. If they don't even tell you that. Like when we all started using Facebook, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know. Did you know when you started using Facebook, like in 2000 and I don't know, whatever it was when it first started?
Absolutely not.
No,
I remember in the early days of Facebook, part of their rights and responsibilities, as they called their terms and conditions, involved their capture of the ownership and intellectual property rights of the photos that people contributed. So at one point, there were paid media advertisements featuring Facebook users who did not consent to be on billboards. And those sorts of shocking moments when we realize that our data is being leveraged in ways beyond our initial awareness and consent, that really frames the challenge for Web3. And right now, I'm not seeing a whole lot of focus on informed consent. In fact, in Web3 in general, the way that our public blockchains work is predicated on a lack of consent for our wallets. We cannot reject any incoming tokens, which is why we are able to enjoy this beautiful, beautifully designed censorship-resistant network. But what that means is that we do not have the ability to control incoming data tokens to our wallet. So our autonomy, the autonomy of our private keys, comes from our ability to remove assets from our wallets and to own data that can interact with smart contracts and can make possible the movement of tokens and value based on more than what is represented on the chain.
Yeah, this is such an important point. So you know what? I made a note here. I'm going to come back to this issue of the fact that we can't say no to incoming data. But before I do that, I want to ask you this question. So in a world where we all control our data, then there is no way to aggregate that data to enable machine learning and continue to develop machine learning. Do you see that being a problem? And how?
I disagree. I think that with advances in secure multi-party computation, in encrypted search, and the ability to query data sets that while maintaining the encryption of their plain text, offer great opportunities for continued machine learning and for training our future algorithms on data sets that are representative and, to the best of our ability, less biased than they are today. However, I think that the informed consent of the users whose data is represented and the meaningful compensation for use of personal data are subjects that we must address before we pursue this very exciting future.
Yeah, definitely. You know what? Many times I think to myself, and I actually wrote an article about this on LinkedIn at some point. I was like, Facebook owes us so much money because we essentially all worked for free, for Facebook, and not just Facebook, for all of these, massive companies like Apple, etc. Right? Like, and they're now worth so much. They owe us airdrops, man. Because they became what they became on the back of the data that we generated by using, their free products, right? So they give you a free email, they give you a free, Facebook profile, and then you go on there and you are interacting. And then in the back end of it, there's like machine learning algorithms learning about everything that you're doing, and then becoming more and more powerful, more and more valuable. And then the value of that network effect goes back to to those companies and shareholders. Whereas the reality is that, I think a lot about how this could be interrelated with UBI. When you think about UBI, like, people often think of UBI as being this thing that is like, that you're just getting free money. But actually, we are all contributing to the creation of these technologies that are then going to put us out of a job, right? Like basically we are all contributing to creating these machine learning algorithms that can then learn from us and do everything better than us. Like even in art, even in music, everything is teachable and learnable. And I mean, you think about NFTs, like the generative, NFTs, that that's a very good example, right? That you don't know, like you put all those combinations together and you don't know what comes out, and actually what comes out is really impressive, right? So these are all, and in that case, it's not even machine learning, it's just like a code, like basically good old-fashioned code, right? So I think that there's definitely, I see a world where we just are, right? Like that we just like exist, and we just go about our lives, hang out, create things, like have fun, whatever, and just through our interactions, machines are constantly learning. So we should be compensated, and that would be the UBI, and it may well be that that will become it can come from gaming, can come from so many different ways. But if I go back and think of, like, let's just take, the big five companies, Amazon, Apple, Google, etc. They all owe us airdrops.
I think you make a really great point, right? That in our current set of circumstances, we are renting our daily conveniences in digital space. We are renting our social interactions. We are paying with our sovereignty and our autonomy. And the big perk is that we get cheap dopamine. It is a hell of a drug.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the dopamine is so addictive for most people. And like, if you don't actively think about this, and I'm a philosopher, I'm a tech philosopher, right? This is what I do. I actively think about these things. For example, I haven't watched a single Netflix series or films in like 2.5 years because I'm trying to make I'm trying to make a statement about it. It's that that like whether it's TikTok, whether it's like all of these things, they're basically tapping into your attention, and it's really important to make a decision on where you're going to give your attention. Do you think that through education it's possible to to make people realize the value of their data, or is it that dopamine is going to be too strong that they can't avoid it? And I suppose on that note, what are your thoughts on a Facebook based metaverse? Like how do you see Web3 and the ethos of Web3 surviving in a world where the likes of Meta are pouring so much money into those things. And then, of course, there's the CBDCs. That's another thing that makes me think a lot about these things, because there are many people who are going to prefer CBDCs because they think that it's more trustworthy because it's issued by government. So the whole point of decentralization is to try and get away from the centralized, whether it's governments, whether it's the centralized powers of the likes of Google and Amazon, Apple, etc. How do you see us being able to educate the public on these topics?
So I think education is a wonderful tool that can help to spark the intent to try with one's own hands. I can tell you what it's like to bake a cake all day, but until you bake a cake yourself, you're not going to smell what it's like coming out of the oven. You're not going to be able to feel the resistance of the whisk in your hand as all the ingredients come together. And so education is the important on-ramp to realizing value in your own life, and that meaningful change in a user's life, when their life becomes easier, faster, cheaper, more attuned to their personal needs, less complex and arduous. That is how we compete with cheap dopamine, is actual value. So to your question about the future of the metaverse, according to Zuck, I don't think that the human beings of the world want to hang out in someone else's website with an iPad strapped to their face. It's not very fun. I think that we can create a much more interesting world if we look at every surface around us, both physical and digital, and see that as an opportunity for interaction, for engagement, for personalization, regardless of the proprietary institution that's putting forth those pixels or that particular gateway.
Yeah, I really, really hope, and I do believe that you're right. But at the same time, I think the power of these companies, like one of the concerns I have about Web3 as it is now, the way it is now, it's a steep learning curve, man. Like learning to set up your wallet, then you have to go to an exchange, you need to buy, you need to then transfer, and you're constantly worrying about sending it to the wrong address. And I had one of the worst experiences was like when I was trying to buy my Moonbird. I won the raffle and I was minting my Moonbird. I went to the wrong website because they had created this exactly identical website, and I lost basically 2.5 ETH, because I clicked the wrong thing. And you feel like you're on your own. There is no protection. There's no customer service, and like there wasn't even like a thing that says, are you sure you want to do this, right? Like it would be really helpful if it told me this looks like it's not the right website, like that. Are you sure you want to do this? And I suppose because maybe that's early days. Do you see that experience over time improving? And I'm just worried that those experiences that are very hard right now, the likes of me and you, we are like, okay, we are just going to stick with it. Yes, it's hard right now. It's early days. Most people are not going to understand that. And I just worry that somebody, one of these big, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Yuga Labs, like think about that. Like now they are trying to, steer away from Ethereum, like what's going to happen now? Yuga Labs is going to become the next Facebook.
I think right now, if we talk about that specific example, Yuga Labs needs to learn how to review their own contracts to make them more efficient. If that was the best effort at an efficient minting contract to ensure that there wouldn't be a gas war, I think we've still got a little bit of growth to go before we flee to a sidechain. Fundamentally, I think that usability is the biggest blocker to adoption in Web3, full stop. We often reach for problems that are attuned to our skill sets and feel comfortable in their pursuit, like scalability and security. But in Web3, we need a healthy dose of user experience design and research. We need to go meet our users where they are in their journey, not at step one in our user journey in our backlog.
Well, that's why I'm so passionate about getting more women involved, because I always say that technology, there are three ways that we interact with technology. It's design, engineer, and use. It's okay if there are not many women coding. At the very least, we could get involved with designing and using, and then giving feedback on how that user experience could be improved, right? And I don't know how many women you see in this space, but I don't see that many, and I'm hoping that will change over time.
Somi, I'm glad to hear that this is something you're seeking, and I'm so excited to welcome you into a lot of the spaces where I hang out, where I interact with dozens and dozens of women in Web3 every day. In fact, I have some friends in Web3 who don't realize, or rather their experiences do not reflect a male-dominated space, because they have come into communities that are focused on embracing female and non-binary participants in our metaverse. And so I think it's really important that we bring openness and transparency and welcoming to all who want to experiment in this new frontier. I especially want to call out boysclub.vip, which is the global community of women and non-binary people in Web3. SheFi, which is an amazing global educational platform that walks women through DeFi content. Meta Gamma Delta, She256. There are even more growing every day, but I think it's really awesome how decentralized technologies have helped to create spaces of affinity and community for folks from all walks of life and all kinds of identities. For me, especially, my introduction to crypto was through an incredible female computer science professor. And she is now an incredible leader in the Bitcoin community a decade later. But at the time when I was first introduced to these spaces where these conversations were happening, I was introduced to them by a young woman. And so I've always thought that these are for me.
That's amazing. I will really appreciate if you could introduce us to some of these amazing women. And
I would be happy to. I absolutely also want to endorse a few of them as future podcast guests. I think their vision and understanding of how to develop inclusive ecosystems is second to none.
Fantastic. That is great. So with our goal of rebranding to a bigger community, it's very important for me that even as we have men and people of other backgrounds and genders coming in, it's very important that we show women and have women in the leadership. That I want. You know what? Let's let the gentleman take a bit of women's splaining, and learn from women too, because I think that we bring a different perspective. I don't want to pigeonhole us into the whole empathetic thing, but we are empathetic, and I think that that's what we do need as we build these these technologies. That's part of why Web3 is not very user friendly, because it's not really got that woman touch in some ways. I feel like we could make it more user friendly by having empathy for people who are finding it hard.
I think from a product perspective, devoting more attention to how we create UX journeys, about how we build our front ends, the kind of design cues and trust cues that we integrate. If we spent as much time and effort on our user experience journeys as we do our smart contract security, Web3 would be a much more usable place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no better.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for having me. It's been a delight to speak with you today. My DMs are open at Proven Authority on Twitter, Evin at Disco.xyz, if anyone has any questions and wants to share their dreams for the metaverse.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Evin. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Evin McMullen. Be sure to follow her on Twitter at Proven Authority. Also follow Disco.xyz and what they're building. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to it on Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star rating and write a review. The full interviews are also available on my YouTube channel, The Somi Arian Show.